This really happened to me, and I'm telling it exactly as I lived it. Some names are changed because Cleveland is smaller than it looks from the shoreway, and people I once called family still drive past the building where this all began. They replaced me in the family business on a Tuesday afternoon while the coffee in the warehouse conference room went cold. We were gathered for what was supposed to be a simple numbers review, quarterly projections, fleet maintenance, the usual, when my brother slid a brass key across the laminate table and said it wasn't mine anymore. The blueprint of our loading map hung behind him, greasy thumbprints circling Dock 3 like a crime scene. A forklift beeped in the hall, a noise I'd always found comforting, and suddenly it sounded like a countdown. On the whiteboard, next to a list of Ohio and Pennsylvania routes, someone had wiped my name off the schedule with a gray smear that looked almost like a bruise. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I grew up at 13100 Berea Road, or that's how it felt. The place smells like corrugated cardboard and motor oil, and the ghost of 20 winters, a scent that clung to my hair and followed me into restaurants like L'Albatross or Momocho when I got fancy once in a while. My dad, Stan Petrowski, built Petrowski Moving and Storage after a decade hauling other people's furniture in other people's trucks. He started with a used box truck he painted himself in our driveway in Old Brooklyn. My job was holding the painter's tape straight while he spelled the family name, block letters with a crooked R that never bothered him. "We move lives," he used to say when I was little, like the motto was something we were sworn to obey, like a union pin pressed into the palm. When I was 12, I knew how to wrap a grand piano for a January loadout on Lorraine Avenue. When I was 16, I could back a 26-foot truck into an alley behind a Tremont brownstone without taking out a single trash can. My brother Evan never liked the cold or the smell. He was charming in the way that gets you free drinks on West 25th and discounts you didn't earn at the West Side Market. When Dad gave us both a set of keys after he signed the papers at the Cuyahoga County Administration Building to incorporate, I put mine on a lanyard like a lifeline. Evan tucked his key into the pocket of a sport coat and told me I was too sentimental about metal. Dad's first stroke came during the polar vortex winter. I learned how to speak in the precise, unfussy language doctors understand, and how to keep payroll moving when an ice storm knocked out power on a Thursday. I learned what happens when trucks don't start in the morning and how to coax them back to life with a propane heater and 3 prayers. When Dad had his second stroke 2 years later, milder, thank God, I learned what a POA was and how a man who built something with his hands can forget the name of the street where he did it. I kept us moving. I built route spreadsheets no one asked for, then built them better. I moved our inventory to barcoded tracking and talked a reluctant foreman through the scanner like it was a superpower. I negotiated with university hospitals for a clinic renovation and kept my cool when their facilities manager threw me a last-minute curveball about elevator access. I wore steel-toed boots and a blazer depending on the hour, and I learned to turn 2 into 10 when cash was thin because a client's check took too long to clear at KeyBank. Evan pitched big dreams and bigger dinners. He brought his wife, Teresa, into the office, Teresa with the perfect hair and lipstick smile that said she was humoring you while she measured you for a smaller role you didn't know you were auditioning for. She had opinions about logos. She had opinions about paint colors. Soon she had opinions about accounting, which would have been funny if it weren't dangerous. She wasn't hired as anything, officially, and yet people started calling her co-owner at the water cooler while I learned to swallow salt. The day he slid the brass key away from me, he called it a board matter. He used that tone men use when they want to make you feel unsophisticated for asking where the cliff is before you step off it. "We've discussed your leadership style," he said, eyes flicking toward Teresa, who had a manila folder in front of her like a prop. "It hasn't been a fit, not for our vision." "Our vision," I said, because sometimes echoing the ridiculous helps you spot all its angles. The vision Dad left to us? Dad would want someone decisive, Teresa said, hands folded like she was being kind. Someone who can take this to the next level. I kept us alive when you were at Barley House buying bottle service on the corporate card, I said. And even as I heard it out loud, I knew I'd given them a gift. Temper, a thing they could point to. Evan slid a type sheet across the table. Board action 1231. And I recognized Marcus Dwyer's blocky signature, our outside accountant, along with Evan's. There was a third signature that made my throat go tight. Dad's. The date, 8 weeks after his second stroke, sat there like its own lie. The resolution removed me as COO effective immediately and authorized the appointment of a chief operating officer to be determined by the president. We'll keep you as a shareholder, Evans said, as if that were magnanimity instead of containment. Dividends as available. What dividends? Revenues are tight. I watched Teresa's eyes flicker, a tell that might as well have been a flare gun. She was afraid of the word tight because tight meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant no more pretty phrases. I'll have Ray walk you out, Evan said. And then Ray, our warehouse supervisor who had split subs with me in the break room 100 times, stood in the doorway, apologizing with his eyes. I didn't cry until I crossed West 117th, because there are rules, and one of them is, you don't give your enemies the sound of your pain. I took Berea to Madison and parked behind a row of brick houses where the snow doesn't melt because the sun can't find it in January. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel until the horn threatened to blow. Okay, I said to nobody. Okay. The first thing you have to know about betrayal is it's rarely a single moment. It's more like a pulley system. Tiny ropes, hidden, pulling in a direction you don't notice until you're hoisted into the air by your ankle. That night in my apartment in Gordon Square, my inbox turned aggressive. Vendors I'd always paid on time. Nautilus Packaging, Great Lakes Strap, the guy in Parma who fixed lift gates on Saturdays, sent polite little reminders that suddenly had red exclamation points. A driver, Samir, texted to ask if his per diem was changing per Evan. A line on our bank portal, which I could still see because no one had bothered to nuke my login yet, showed a recurring asset MGMT fee I didn't recognize. The payee's name was new, Lakefront Asset Partners, LLC. I clicked more details and got the corporate equivalent of a shrug. I slept maybe 2 hours. In the morning, I put on the jacket I always wore to the courthouse and headed downtown, the kind of autopilot that kicks in when your world tilts. The Cuyahoga County Fiscal Office sits inside the beige maze of government buildings on East 9th, the kind of place you'd never wander into unless you needed to. I'd been there a dozen times with Dad, the two of us killing time before a recording by arguing about whether Angelo's or Garashi's had the better pie. I told the clerk the parcel number and my voice didn't shake. 014238222. I told her I needed to see deeds and mortgages for 13100 Berea Road. You a party? She asked, eyebrows lifting like a drawbridge. I'm the daughter, I said. I run the company. It wasn't true that morning, but it was still true inside my bones. The computer coughed up a list of instruments. Grant deed from 15 years ago, I knew that one. A mortgage from KeyBank, refinanced in 2017, I knew that one too. And then a quitclaim deed recorded 6 months back, transferring the warehouse from Petrowski Moving and Storage, Inc. to Lakefront Asset Partners, LLC. I stared at the screen like it might change under my eyes. The grantor signature block read, Stanley Petrowski, President, the scrawl a lake of ink that looked like my father's name and didn't feel like his hand. The notary was a stranger. The mailing address for the grantee, Lakefront Asset Partners, was a condo in Lakewood on Detroit Avenue that I knew belonged to Teresa's sister. My jaw did that invisible clench that gives you headaches later. The bank had recorded a new mortgage the same day as the quitclaim. It was a short-term note with a balloon due in 24 months, 2 Christmases to pay everything, or else. I scrolled to the signature page and stared again, because that's what you do when you want a paper to explain itself. You look until the black on white rearranges into a truth. Dad's name was there. Evan's wasn't. Teresa's wasn't. Lakefront Asset Partners, LLC, was listed as an Ohio limited liability company. I asked for copies. I paid in cash. I walked outside with the papers in a manila envelope I hugged to my ribs like a body shield. The lake wind was sharp enough to take skin. I ducked into poor Cleveland to warm my fingers and spread the documents on a table that still smelled like someone else's pastry. I snapped photos. I ran the LLC name through the Ohio Secretary of State website with the kind of robotic calm that comes before you scream, and there it was, Lakefront Asset Partners, formed 2 months before the deed transfer. Statutory agent, a small downtown law office I didn't recognize. Members, undisclosed. But the filing was submitted by a paralegal whose name popped if you've lived here long enough and paid attention. She'd once worked for a firm Teresa liked to brag about. I didn't cry then either. To cry, you need safety. I had a cup of coffee and a stack of paper, and the realization that my brother had tucked our building into a shell company. At the same time, he started calling me too emotional for leadership. By afternoon, I had an appointment with an attorney who used to share a hallway with my father in a building off Lakeside. Leah Park didn't do criminal or divorces. She did business fights, the kind you settle with injunctions and emergency motions and enough exhibits to choke a copier. The waiting room had a framed poster of the West Side Market, a good omen. I told Leah everything, and when I got to the part about the quitclaim and Dad's second stroke, she put her pen down. "Do you have medical records for the date of signing?" she asked. "I can get them," I said. He was in rehab at Metro, occupational therapy, speech therapy. He was better, but not boardroom better. "Notarization date is strong, but not bulletproof," she said. "If a notary says they saw him sign, we need to show he lacked capacity or that the signature is inconsistent. We'll need an expert for the handwriting. We can also look at the loan covenants. Balloons are unforgiving. If they're out of compliance on debt service or taxes, the bank has leverage." "I don't want leverage," I said. The truth surprised me as it left my mouth. "I want the building." Leah smiled the way you smile when you might like a client. "Then we make them bleed first, and while they're focused on the cuts, you buy their tourniquet." I slept a little that night, not because anything was fixed, but because rage will propel you like coffee when the body finally quits. I kept quiet. I let my shareholder login fade into a 403 error because pushing would warn them. I went by the warehouse at dawn, parking across from the steel yard so Ray wouldn't see me if he came in early. A new sign was taped to the employee entrance, Lakefront Asset Partners, all lease inquiries call, and a number I didn't recognize. I photographed it from my window, the lens shaking just enough to remind me I'm not stone. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring into voicemail because I don't answer unknowns anymore. I've learned that bad news prefers disguises. The transcript popped up a minute later, clumsy with autocorrect, and it made my stomach drop and soar all at once. "This is Angela with KeyBank Special Assets regarding Lakefront Asset Partners. We need to discuss the note. Please return our call." I played the message 3 times to hear it in her voice, human, unhurried. Special Assets wasn't a department you met when things were fine. Special Assets meant someone had missed a covenant or a payment or a paper the bank considered sacred. Special Assets meant the house might be on fire. I pulled on my boots, the steel-toed ones that make a different sound on cold sidewalks, and I headed back into the kind of February that cuts you to the quick. I had Leah's card in my pocket, the deed in my bag, and a thought so sharp I didn't have to speak it. If they'd hidden the building inside a shell, I would pry that shell open, take the meat, and leave them the empty curve as a souvenir. I was halfway to my car when an email arrived from Evan with the subject line, "Shareholder Distributions." I shouldn't have read it in the street, but I did, breath fogging. "Given current market conditions," he wrote, The board has voted to suspend all dividends indefinitely. We appreciate your understanding. Please return any company property by Friday." I laughed. It came out like a cough. And then I looked up and realized Teresa was standing across the street by a black Tesla, watching me. She lifted a hand as if we were neighbors and I was out for a stroll. She was smiling like a cat who'd learned how to use a stapler. I lifted my phone and took her picture as if I were a tourist who'd stumbled into a zoo. Her smile faded just enough to feel like a promise. The voicemail icon on my phone glowed like a pilot light. KeyBank wanted to talk. Somewhere, my brother was about to find out that the floor he'd just pulled from under me had a trap door underneath it, and I still had the map. Angela at KeyBank called me back on the first ring, like she'd been watching the phone. "Special assets," she said, voice low, and even the way nurses talk to you when they need you to breathe. "You're listed as an interested party?" "I'm a shareholder of Petrowski Moving and Storage," I said, staring across my apartment at the framed photograph of my dad standing in front of the first box truck, paint on his knuckles. "And I'm his daughter. The borrower is Lakefront Asset Partners, but the building is our home. I need to understand what's happening." "We have a confidentiality obligation to the borrower," she said, and I heard the gentle click of corporate policy shutting a door. Then she exhaled, and something in it sounded human. "But I can confirm we've had difficulties obtaining updated financial statements, proof of insurance, and tax clearance on parcels 01423-822 and 823. There are covenant issues. If the borrower doesn't cure, we'll proceed with remedies. You can send me an email, angela.martin@keybank.com, and we can discuss a third-party NDA to allow us to share limited information." "Remedies, meaning?" I asked, because I needed her to say the words out loud. "Acceleration of the debt, foreclosure," she said. "Possibly a receiver, given the income-producing nature of the property." "It's owner-occupied," I said, before I could stop myself. "There is no income." Silence hummed in my ear like fluorescent lights. "That would be surprising," Angela said politely. "Our understanding is that the property is leased to Petrowski Moving and Storage." My heart thumped against my ribs. 2 beats, hard enough that I felt the shape of them. Teresa's manila folder flashed across my mind, all the places she could have slotted a fake lease into the bank package and called it quality. "If I can provide you with documentation about the company's internal issues," I said carefully, "and a path to bring the loan current, or alternatively, a credible purchaser for the note." "Ms. Petrowski," she said, and something changed in her tone. My name, my seriousness, the fact that I spoke in sentences banks-like. "Send me your counsel's contact. If we pursue a sale of the note, it would be handled through our REO group, but special assets would coordinate. We don't decide today." I thanked her like she'd given me blood. I hung up and called Leah. "They'll talk," I said. "They'll consider selling the note." "That's faster than I expected," she replied, perfectly calm. "We need to package you as the opposite of whatever Evan and Teresa are, credible, funded, discreet. You'll form a purchasing LLC yesterday. I'll draft the NDA. You'll find money." "Right," I said, and stared out my window at the empty lot near Detroit and West 58th where somebody had promised a dog park for 5 years. I'll find money. I am not the kind of person who wears a blazer and says, "deal flow," like it doesn't sting my teeth. I'm the kind of person who knows how to tie a piano board to a dolly so it doesn't skid on frozen concrete. But Cleveland is full of people whose grandfathers built things and left them keys to rooms I didn't know were there. I started calling favors with hands I didn't remember I had. I called University Hospital's facilities manager, Ken, the one who once called me at 3 a.m. when a freight elevator died in Rainbow Babies, and I sent 2 guys with blankets and coffee. "You still doing miracles?" he said, warm in the way of a man who keeps a list of who has his back. "I need a different kind," I said. "Do you know anyone who buys notes from banks when borrowers mess up?" "Besides my ex-brother-in-law," he said, and then gave me the name of a guy at a midtown family office that sometimes took ugly properties and convinced them to behave. He's slippery, Ken warned. Smile like a salesman, mind like a cold front. Don't tell him more than he needs. I made a list and filled it with names that tasted like metal in my mouth. An old client who'd sold a chain of auto body shops to Caliber. A cousin of my high school friend who worked at a place on Euclid that turned old factories into lofts and didn't mind if the math was violent as long as the returns said yes. A woman I'd met at a fundraiser for the Cleveland Food Bank, who ran a small credit fund that did bridge loans at rates that made you wince and say thank you anyway. I changed into the only suit I owned that still made me stand straighter, and I became the version of myself who can sit in a glass conference room and talk about timelines and bid processes without throwing up. The Midtown family office guy, white hair, beautiful watch he kept turning over like he loved it more than people, called himself Rick, which didn't match the name on the receptionist's sign-in screen. He listened. He asked good questions. "You have a clean LLC?" he said. "I will by the end of the day," I said. "You can get the bank comfortable that you're not a stalking horse for the current borrower. If they smell related parties, they'll bounce you. And even if they don't, you'll pay retail." "I have counsel," I said, and slid Leah's card across the table like a talisman. "And I'm not trying to do them a favor. I'm trying to put my family's building back where it belongs. If you can get me a package, loan docs, title, delinquency detail, I'll look," Rick said, shrugging like the world wasn't on fire. "I like families when they don't kill each other." "Do you like angry daughters?" I asked, because humor keeps sharks interested. "Only when they're good at math," he said, and smiled finally, a real one that showed he'd meant to scare me to see if I'd back up. I sent Angela the NDA from Leah within 2 hours. She sent a DocuSign back in 10 minutes. By noon the next day, I had a data room link that made me feel, briefly, like I was in a heist movie. Folders labeled borrower financials, loan history, collateral. The files told a story that felt like holding your breath too long. Unaudited statements produced by Teresa's friend, a thin lease between Lakefront and Petrowski, signed the same day as the quitclaim. Insurance certificates that had expired and been replaced by policies with coverage exclusions that would give a seasoned underwriter hives. And in the correspondence folder, a thread that showed Angela asking, politely at first, and then with little red flags in her bullet points, for backup. Teresa replied twice with "see attached," and sent the same PDF of a fake rent schedule showing market rent that would have made my dad snort into his coffee. The taxes were 2 quarters behind. The DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, was a mess. The tenant had paid rent 3 months and then stopped, coincidentally when Evan removed me from the company and froze distributions. Special Assets had a draft letter to accelerate the indebtedness and declare all sums due and payable, and for the first time since I'd seen the quitclaim deed, I felt a crack of sky. "I can bid on the note," Rick said over the phone when I walked him through the files without sending them. "But I don't buy without control. Who runs the workout?" "I do," I said, "through a purchasing LLC." "You're sure you want the note?" he said. "It's a weapon, but it cuts both ways. You'll own their fear and their blood, and you'll also own their mess. Foreclosure, legal fees, maybe a receiver, tenants." "There are no tenants," I said. "They faked a lease. I know this building. I know its mess. She's mine." He laughed at she, and I let him. "Price?" he asked. "What do you think the bank takes?" 80 cents on the unpaid balance, he said. 75 if they're pissy. They'll want a real bidder, not a crying daughter." "I'm not crying," I said. "I'm making lunch." He whistled quietly. "You get me an LOI from the bank that they'll engage. I'll put up part of the equity. Not all. I'm not a charity. You come up with skin." I hung up and stared at the cheap tile in my kitchen. Skin. I had a 401k that looked like a sick plant and a car with 180,000 miles. I had a father who'd built a building with his hands and a brother who'd pawned it for a balloon note. I called Ken again and asked him if he knew anyone who loved a poetic fight. I know a woman at a fund that likes ugly real estate made beautiful, he said, and she hates bullies. Her name was Nora, and she drank her coffee black in a corner of Phoenix Coffee on Lee Road with a notebook full of tiny squares and a pencil you had to sharpen with a knife. She let me talk for 11 minutes exactly, and then she started asking questions like she had wire cutters for nonsense. I'll take a second lien behind the note, she said, if your purchase price leaves room. And I want a personal guarantee capped at a number that doesn't ruin you, but hurts if you flake. I don't flake, I said. I wrote cap on my pad and underlined it twice. You also don't have a track record buying distressed paper, she said. Find someone who does to stand next to you, a co-GP. You keep control. They keep the banker from rolling his eyes at your hair. I texted Rick. He sent back, I'll be the name. You be the knife. Leah worked the bank like a surgeon. She sent a letter that read like a song only a banker could love. Our client, Gordon Square Capital, LLC, an Ohio limited liability company, to be formed, is prepared to submit an offer to purchase KeyBank's note secured by that certain mortgage recorded under Instrument No. It had all the melody of commerce, efficiency, seriousness, the whisper of, we have money and discipline. Angela responded by looping in a man named Travis, who signed his emails VP, Oreo Dispositions, and who wrote in complete sentences without adjectives like a man who has been burned before. In the middle of all this, Evan decided to show me his teeth. A certified letter arrived, big and stiff like a threat even before I sliced it open with my house key. It was from a downtown firm with a lobby that smells like money and lemons. Cease and desist, it began, a phrase I'd only seen in movies, telling me to stop interference with the operations of Petrowski Moving and Storage, Inc. They accused me of defamation, of misappropriation of confidential information, and, most laughable, of trespass, as if I'd broken into a building I'd cleaned in December with my own 2 hands. Teresa had probably typed every line herself, all tidy and straight-backed like she was getting a grade. I sent it to Leah. She wrote back a single line, frame it. I did, badly. In the $5 frame aisle at Target. I hung it in my hallway so I could touch it each morning like a mezuzah. The next week was a montage no one would believe if it weren't mine. Leah filed a petition in Cuyahoga County Probate Court asking for limited guardianship of Dad's estate with respect to reviewing transactions executed post-stroke, attaching letters from his speech therapist that said reduced executive function in a sentence that made my chest ache. She emailed a former Secret Service handwriting expert she'd used on a forged stock transfer in another life. He agreed to examine Dad's signature on the quitclaim for consistency, contingent on getting exemplars from before and after the stroke. I drove to Metro Health and sat with Dad, who had good days and fog days, and I hid my knives behind a smile. Remember when we painted the truck, Dad? I asked, and he smiled because muscle memory survives when names die. He touched the air like he was writing his own last name with a crooked R. Evan refused me access to Dad's facility, without prior coordination, claiming I upset him. The staff rolled their eyes and waved me in. Ray texted me from a burner number I didn't recognize, don't reply, to say Teresa had been walking through the warehouse with a clipboard and a man in Allbirds who took pictures of the roof and the loading dock as if he were appraising us for parts. They shopping the place? I asked, even though the question answered itself. Or trying to figure out what's broken before the bank notices, Ray replied. Samir quit. 2 more are looking. When Travis from KeyBank finally sent a bid process letter, my hands shook. It was pure Oreo porn. Process, disclaimers, a bid deadline 10 days out, proof of funds requirement, no financing contingencies, as is, where is, with all faults. It named the unpaid principal balance, a number that made my stomach twist, $1.8 million. It offered to provide on-site inspections by appointment and warned of significant investor interest, which could have been true or could have been a salesman's lie. Either way, the game had a calendar now. We had 10 days to turn fury into a number. Rick and I sat at a two-top at Marble Room Sushi on Prospect because he liked to feel like a big shot even when he was buying nothing but edamame. He broke the math on a napkin. If we pay, say, $1.44,080 on the dollar, plus legal, plus our diligence costs, plus a cushion for carrying during foreclosure if they don't fold, he tapped the pen like a metronome. We need to believe the building is worth north of 2.5 as is. You think it is? I know it can be, I said. When Dad bought it, the neighborhood wasn't ready. Now Madison Avenue is full of breweries and dog daycare. There's talk about remaking the West Park Freight Spur into a trail. You put decent windows in, a roof that doesn't cry when it snows, and you can lease to 3 different logistics outfits who can't find that ceiling height within city limits. You get them out first, he said. I will, I said, and tasted what that meant, like a coin under my tongue. Nora agreed to come in for $300,000 as a second behind Rick's fund if I capped my guarantee at $50,000 and pledged my pitiful 401k. I want first call on the refi when you stabilize, she said, and I want to be the one to tell you I told you so if you get soft. I'm not getting soft, I said, and signed the term sheet with a pen that had lived in my desk since I was 26. We formed Gordon Square Capital, LLC, in 20 minutes on the Secretary of State site and bought a domain name because appearances matter even when you can build a truck ramp with your bare hands. Leah set up a bank account at Huntington with a branch manager she'd represented during a divorce. He expedited our KYC like a magician. Angela sent a packet of loan sale purchase and sale agreement with a list of representations so short it made me smile. Banks don't promise much when they sell you a mess. 2 days before bids were due, Teresa posted a photo on the company's Instagram. Her on the warehouse floor, hard hat perched on perfect hair, pointing at a pallet of shrink-wrapped boxes like she'd discovered logistics. The caption read, "Exciting upgrades coming to our facility. Shocks your growth leadership, shock family business." I didn't follow the account anymore, but people love a train wreck, and screenshots arrive whether you invite them or not. I stared at her smile and felt a calm so cold it scared me a little. It wasn't rage anymore. It was geometry. "Do I tell the bank about the Instagram?" I asked Leah, half kidding. "Only if you want to annoy them," she said. "We give them the number. We prove we can close. We do not gossip." So we gave them the number. 81 cents on the dollar with a 10% deposit wired within 24 hours of acceptance, closing within 7 business days thereafter. No financing contingency because Rick would wire the balance from an account that lived in a building with an elevator operator. We included a letter on Gordon Square Capital letterhead, a PDF Nora made that looked like a teenager's concept of a firm, saying all the right things about local stewardship and efficient resolution. I attached as an afterthought a short bio about my father and the company, the photos of the truck with the crooked R, because sometimes even bankers are from somewhere and built by someone. The bid letter went out at 4:13 p.m. I hit send and sat perfectly still, like motion might jinx the electrons. At 5:02 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're making a fool of yourself." I didn't have to ask who it was. I blocked it and then unblocked it because evidence is a gift when your enemy loves leaving fingerprints. At 8:17 the next morning, Travis emailed. "We appreciate your bid," he wrote. "We have received multiple competitive offers. We will revert by end of week." 2 hours later, he called. "Can you move to 85 cents?" he asked, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "I can move to 83, I said, swallowing, doing math fast in the air. "And I can wire a deposit today." I overheard him typing, or maybe rearranging his coffee. 83 and a deposit today, he said. "Yes," I said. "Send me wire instructions," he replied. "This isn't acceptance, but it would be viewed favorably." Rick told me to never do deposits on maybe, but I also knew the smell of momentum. Nora said, If you lose $10,000 to win a war, it's tuition. Leah said, I'll wire when you tell me. At 3:41 p.m., Angela called again. We're leaning your way, she said, voice still even, but I thought I heard a warmth reserved for people who surprise you by acting like grown-ups. You'll have a draft PSA tonight? I walked to the lake and let the wind slap me 10 times. I dialed Dad and left a voicemail in case the nurse put the phone to his ear later. I'm coming home, I told him. I'm bringing the building back. That night, a second certified letter slid under my apartment door like a snake. I didn't touch it until morning because I wanted to sleep once without new poison. It was worse and better than the first. A notice to quit, issued by Lakefront Asset Partners to Petrowski Moving and Storage for non-payment of rent. The landlord, Evan and Teresa's shell, had given the tenant, my father's company that they controlled, notice to get out in 3 days or face eviction. I stared at it, a document that said in black and white what I'd been sure of in gut and bone. They had built this sham to steal, and now they were stealing with paperwork. If they evicted the company, they'd empty the warehouse, shut the doors, stop trucks, and claim I'd killed the family business by daring to fight. If they moved the assets under a new entity across town, they'd leave our building dark and the bank angrier and me with a dead prize. I sent the notice to Leah, who responded with 3 words. It's a gift. How? I asked, heart pounding, mind playing out pallet jacks rolling into the night, caged inventory disappearing into rented trucks with the logo taped over. Receivership, she said. If we own the note by Friday, we go into Cuyahoga County Common Pleas with a verified complaint and a motion. We show the judge. Sham lease, self-dealing, risk of waste. We ask for a receiver immediately. We'll get it. With a receiver in place, they can't move a single box without court permission. But if they move fast, then you move faster, she said. Get dressed. We're going to the warehouse. We're going to take pictures. We're going to catch them in the act. I drove to Berea Road with my heartbeat in my hands. I parked where the steel yard shadow hides you and pulled on a neon vest I'd kept in the trunk like I'd known this day would come. Leah met me there, hair in a bun, boots sensible, a binder under her arm like armor. We walked to the loading dock and stopped at the sight that punched the air from my lungs. 2 rented trucks at Dock 2 and Dock 3. Ramps down, dollies loaded with shrink-wrapped inventory. Ray was there, eyes on me like he'd been waiting for a sign from a god he didn't believe in anymore. Teresa stood by the clipboards, lips pressed into a satisfied line, a man in Allbirds beside her with a laser tape measure pointed at the ceiling height like the building might give him an extra inch if he wished hard enough. Evan's voice carried from the office to the floor. Just get it out. We'll sort later. He laughed. It was an ugly sound. Turn on your camera, Leah whispered, and I did. We stepped into the open, and the whole floor stuttered like a dropped wrench clanging, that quieting ripple that happens when the truth walks in. Property tour? I said, smile bright, voice sweeter than religion. Who's your new tenant, Teresa? Yourself? Teresa's clipboard faltered. Evan came out of the office with a face like a man who just realized the ocean is tidal. You're trespassing, he said. On my father's property? I asked. On the collateral of a bank that's about to put a receiver in here by breakfast? You have no idea what you're talking about, he sneered, but his eyes went to the ramps, to the pallets poised like fleeing deer. He smelled the word receiver whether he understood it or not. Leah lifted her phone too, calm as Sunday. You're moving collateral in the face of an uncured default, she said, almost conversational. Do you know what waste means in this context? Judges do. Ray stepped closer to me, subtly, like a man who knows which way the wind is going to blow and wants to stand on the right side of it. Samir wasn't there. His absence was its own ache. The man in Allbirds put his tape measure down and looked like he regretted every choice he'd made that morning, including socks. Teresa opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked at Evan with her lips pressed so tight they went white. Some women can turn their faces into knives. I watched her try. It didn't work on me anymore. Not when the trucks were already loaded, not when the bank was circling, not when my father's signature had been turned into a keyhole and I'd finally found the shape of the key. "Call the police," Evan said weakly. And even as he said it, he knew it would sound ridiculous on the 911 recording that would be an exhibit in a case with a future we could all feel. "Call—" A horn split the air, long, impatient. A Cleveland police cruiser rolled the corner slowly like a diner waitress with coffee, unhurried, ready to see the show. And in that second, lights reflecting in the glass of the office door, Ray's knuckles white on the pallet jack, Teresa's clipboard trembling, Leah's camera steady, my breath hard and thin, I understood something like prophecy. Whether or not the bank accepted our bid that afternoon, the story had tipped. The trucks were halfway down the throat of the dock, and the law was pulling into the lot, and there are some moments even liars can't wallpaper. "Afternoon," the officer said mildly, stepping out into the winter that could chip a tooth. "What's all this, then?" The officer took in the scene like he'd walked into a family dinner where the turkey was already on fire. His name tag read, M. Jensen. "We got a call about a disturbance," he said, pen poised. "Names?" "Petrowski," Evan blurted too fast. He pointed at me like a kid telling on a sibling. "She's trespassing. We're trying to move our inventory. We have a lease. We're the tenant." "I'm Petrowski," I said, calm because calm is a weapon. "This is our family's building. I'm a shareholder. There's a bank default. The lender has notified the borrower of covenant breaches and is taking steps to enforce. This," I gestured to the trucks, the pallets teetering, the laser tape measure still blinking out its last reading, "might be waste of collateral." Officer Jensen's eyebrows made a little tent. "Okay," he said, slower now. He looked at Leah. "You counsel?" "Yep." Leah flipped open her wallet to her bar card and then lifted her phone, screen recording bright and obvious. "There's a sham lease. We'll have a receiver appointed. If they remove a single pallet before a judge hears it, they're going to have a very bad afternoon." "Is anyone hurt?" he asked, the first question they always ask because it tells them how quickly they need to escalate. "Just our pride," I said, and Teresa's mouth pinched into a line so fine it could slice paper. The officer let out a breath that fogged the winter air. "This is a civil matter," he said, the sentence I'd expected, the sentence that sounds like a shrug until you hear the second part. "Which means I'm not arresting anybody for standing where they have a right to stand. But I am noting that a dispute exists, that a bank is allegedly involved, and that moving property under dispute could complicate things for everyone. I'd suggest nobody move anything until a judge decides, unless you feel like testifying about it later." He wrote slower than he spoke, deliberate, like he wanted his words to be heavy when they landed. "Thank you, officer," I said. I meant it. Teresa tried a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll reschedule the trucks," she told the man in Allbirds, who had the desperate look of a contractor who was about to lose his day rate. "Come back Friday." "Friday's a bad day," Leah said lightly, and I heard the blade beneath it. We left with photos, video, the officer's incident number, and the satisfied silence of people who had said the right words at the right time. In the parking lot, Leah squeezed my arm. "Go home," she said. "I'll draft. If the bank accepts the bid, we'll file the complaint and receiver motion by 8 a.m. I didn't go home. I drove east on the shoreway with the lake throwing up gray, and I let the cold get into me until there was no room for fear. My phone buzzed at a red light by East 55th email from Travis. "We are pleased to inform you, KeyBank intends to proceed with your offer to purchase the note secured by mortgage recorded as instrument no, I didn't see the rest at first because the world tilted. I pulled into the parking lot at Gus's diner and cried for the first time since they slid that brass key away, tears fast and not pretty, shaking like something built of gaskets and bolts finally gave. I wiped my face on my sleeve and called Rick. "We got it," I said. Wire the deposit now, he said, warmth tucked under the command. Tell your lawyer to start typing like God intended lawyers to type. By 6 p.m., I had wired the deposit. By 7 p.m., Leah had a verified complaint and a motion for appointment of a receiver drafted so tight there wasn't a single unnecessary comma to snag on. Nora texted, Proud of you. Sleep. Tomorrow is a street fight. I didn't sleep. I laid my suit out like armor and put my boots beside it because dignity and traction are not mutually exclusive. At 6:11 a.m., I was on Lakeside Avenue, parking across from the old courthouse where probate lives, looking up at the stone that has watched a century of other people's messes. By 7:52, Leah had filed the complaint electronically in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas from her office. By 8:03, a clerk had stamped the motion, received, and assigned us to courtroom 18D. The bailiff sounded like he liked coffee more than people. Judge can hear you at 9 if opposing shows, he said. If not, he'll take your proffer. Opposing showed. Evan came with a lawyer from the lemon-smelling firm. She was tall, with a jaw like a gavel, and a binder tabbed to look like confidence. Teresa sat in the back row in a white coat that looked expensive and wrong for a courthouse. I sat at counsel table beside Leah and tried not to think about the fact that I could still smell our warehouse on my hands. Judge Barker had a face like a retired baseball catcher, kind, scarred by years of people pitching nonsense at him. He looked at the caption, at the words, ex parte motion for appointment of receiver, at the exhibits, the sham lease, the bank correspondence, the notice to quit from a landlord to a tenant with the same last name. He looked at the police incident report from Officer Jensen, his lips pressed together like someone who'd tasted something bitter. Leah stood, voice level. Your Honor, we represent the purchaser of the KeyBank note that encumbers the subject property. The borrower created a shell, executed a lease with itself, and is now attempting to move assets in the face of default. There's a risk of waste. We ask for a receiver to preserve the property pending foreclosure. We propose Cleveland Receivership Services, a neutral with experience in industrial properties. They've consented and are available. Opposing counsel stood, cool as a January pain. Judge, this is a family dispute masquerading as an emergency. There's no evidence of waste. My client is merely moving inventory between facilities. Judge Barker lifted a hand. Counsel, moving inventory out of a collateral property triggers every alarm in a receiver's head. We're not going to play cute. I'll appoint a receiver on a temporary basis pending a full hearing in 10 days. Receivership will be limited to the real property and any fixtures. No one moves anything without receiver. Consent, he scribbled. Order today, bond by noon. If your receiver crosses me, I'll cross him back. The lemon lawyer opened her mouth, but the judge had already turned to his bailiff. Next case, he said. When the order hit my phone at 10:11 a.m., I felt the world go quiet in that way that isn't silence so much as absence of panic. The receiver, a man named Victor with soft hands and a precise watch, met us at the warehouse at 1. He had a copy of the order in a clear sleeve like a badge. Nobody moves anything, he said to Teresa and Evan in the tone of a man who has said this sentence so many times that it might be tattooed somewhere no one sees. Keys, please. Evan laughed. You can't be serious, he said, but his hand went to his pocket anyway, fingers searching for a set of keys that belonged to the story and not the day. Victor waited. Keys, he repeated. Teresa pulled a ring from her purse, the same brass key from the conference table, its weight oddly specific even from a few feet away. She held it with 2 fingers like it might burn. Inventory is not subject to— Save it for the hearing, Victor said, or don't. Either way, no one touches a pallet without my say-so. Ray watched from dock 2, jaw set, when Victor turned to him and said, You can keep the building running, but nobody moves stock. Ray nodded once, crisp. I could have hugged him. I didn't. We were soldiers on a wall, and you don't cry on a wall. At 4:23 p.m., Travis sent the final purchase and sale agreement. At 4:50, Rick and Nora wired the balance. At 5:12, KeyBank countersigned. At 5:19, I held in my hands an assignment of the note and mortgage recorded that same day by e-recording in Cuyahoga County. I had not only the knife, I had the deed to the knife. Evan texted me at 7:01 p.m. "You don't know what you've done," he wrote. "You've destroyed us." I typed, deleted, typed again. "You did that," I finally sent. "I'm just turning on the lights." At midnight, my phone pinged. A motion from opposing counsel to dissolve the receivership, full of adjectives and indignant italics. I forwarded it to Leah with a single sentence. "See you at 9. I fell asleep on my couch in my suit, shoes off, brass key in my mind flickering like an exit sign. When I woke up, someone had slipped a copy of our father's signature under my door. 3 signatures, actually, on 3 different documents, the quitclaim, the mortgage, and a bank form I hadn't seen before. No note, just the copies, crisp like a dare. I held the paper up to the morning light and saw the tremor on the S of Stanley like an EKG. I thought about the paralegal's name on the lakefront filings. I thought about the notary stamp with a commission number I could run down to the end of the earth. Down at Metro Health, Dad had a good day. He held my hand as I told him in simple language what had happened. "I bought the paper," I said. "I bought the paper so they can't hurt the building anymore." He smiled the smile people learn in physical therapy when they reach 1 inch farther than they did yesterday. "Paper," he said softly, then stronger, "my building." He tapped the air again, that crooked R I'd been chasing all month. I cried in the parking lot where no one could see me, and then I dried my face with my sleeve because crying is not a strategy. It's a pressure valve. The handwriting expert, a man named Mullins, with a voice like a radio and hands that never shook, called Leah from his office in Lakewood. "Preliminarily," he said, "careful because evidence is a church and you don't whisper in a sanctuary. These signatures do not appear to be consistent with known exemplars prior to Mr. Petrowski's stroke. The line quality suggests weakness. There are indications of tracing on the tail of the Y. I'd like to see the originals." "Discovery will get us there," Leah said, "and a subpoena for the notary's journal." "Send it," he said. "I don't do halfway." That night, I walked through the warehouse with Victor and Ray. We made a list like old priests inventorying relics after a siege. Dock plates, check. Fire extinguishers, check. Roof leaks, 3. 2 of them near the west wall where the snowmelt always finds a seam. Boiler groaning like a tired man, check. The place felt like a heart held together with rubber bands and stubbornness. "She's good," Victor said, eyes appraising. "She needs a roof, she needs love, but she's good." "She's home," I said, and my breath fogged in the air like prayer. In the morning, the receiver hearing lasted 8 minutes. Opposing counsel argued volume and adjectives. Our side argued facts. Judge Barker looked at the notice to quit again. He looked at the Instagram post Teresa had made about exciting upgrades, which now sat like evidence of intent, even if she meant it as a brag. He looked at the bank's acceleration letter. "The receivership will continue," he said, voice flat with finality. "Bond remains. Full hearing on the merits on the 21st. His gavel didn't bang because judges rarely bang gavels, but we all heard it anyway. When we stood to leave, Teresa stared at me with a look I recognized from high school, the girl who always got picked, seeing the ball in your hands. I smiled like a woman who buys paper at a discount and turns it into a kingdom. On the way out, Ray caught up with me. "I'm not taking a side," he said, which is what you say when you've already chosen. "But if you need a foreman for whatever comes next, I know every inch of this floor. And Samir says hi. He's been hauling for some kombucha company, but it pays like a meme." "Tell Samir to call me," I said. "And tell your wife I still owe her the pierogi recipe she asked for." Ray laughed. "She says Murtis is on. Detroit has the best, and I told her you'd take that personally." I do, I said, but I'll bring her mine anyway. In business, there's a phase where everything that happens is chess in a room full of toddlers with juice boxes. Evan filed nonsense in probate to try to block the examination of Dad's transactions. A magistrate gave him a look I would pay to see again and set a schedule that favored facts over noise. The notary, when finally subpoenaed, arrived to her deposition in a cardigan and a fear sweat that cut through the perfume. "Do you recall Mr. Petrowski signing in your presence?" Leah asked gently, and the woman's eyes flicked to her lawyer and back, as if the answer might be hiding under the table. "I was told he signed," she said. "By who?" Silence. "By who?" Leah repeated with the patience of a woman who could outwait snow. "Mrs. Teresa Petrowski," the notary whispered finally. She said he had trouble writing, but he made a mark, and we could clean it up for legibility." I watched the court reporter look up, eyes briefly wide, then back down to her machine. Clean it up. The phrase hung in the room like smoke. When the handwriting expert filed his report, it landed like a brick. "In my professional opinion," he wrote, "the signatures on the quitclaim deed and promissory note were not authored by Mr. Petrowski. The characteristics are inconsistent with his known writing. The probability of common authorship is extremely low." We shouted in silence. We breathed. We did not post. We didn't have to. The law would do the posting for us. The foreclosure proceeded. Owning the note let us file a complaint that wasn't about being right. It was about being owner. Lakefront Asset Partners, LLC, failed to answer in time because Evan believed that bluster is a calendar. When their answer came, it was full of words that can't stop math. The judge set a sheriff's sale date like a countdown clock on the kitchen wall. Teresa tried a stunt, an 11th-hour refinance with a hard money lender on Pearl Road whose terms would have made a devil blush. But Victor wouldn't sign off on any encumbrance without court permission, and no court was going to bless a loan secured by a forged deed while a receivership was steadying the patient. They ran out of adjectives. We ran out of reasons to be afraid. 2 weeks before the sale, I told Victor I wanted to meet in the conference room at the warehouse. I brought a single sheet of paper, a lease form from a standard industrial template that every broker in Cleveland has on their desktop, and a rent number that would have made Dad whistle in admiration. It was market, and then some. Teresa showed up in a cream sweater and a look that meant business. Evan wore a suit that didn't fit his shoulders right, like he'd borrowed righteousness. "I'm offering you occupancy," I said. 36 months, triple net, rent at market, which, given the improvements you didn't make, and the roof I will, means a number 3 times what you've paid yourself on paper. Pay the first and last, plus a 2-month security deposit, and I'll pause the foreclosure and receivership fight long enough for you to do the thing you say you care about, moving people. Miss a payment and the receiver changes locks before dawn. Evans smirked. "Extortion," he said. "Math," I corrected. Teresa read the number. Her cheeks went a shade that had no name in her makeup drawer. "This is outrageous," she hissed. "You'll bankrupt the company." "You did that when you took a balloon note and planned to pay it with rent from yourself," I said. "This is a lifeline priced like reality." "You can't—" Evan started and then trailed off because the sentence he wanted, "You can't do this to us," had too much truth in it to be useful. He tried again. "You can't evict your family." "You already evicted yours," I said, and slid a pen across the table. "Sign or don't. The sheriff doesn't care. Neither do I." They signed. Teresa's hand shook. Evan's did not, because bravado is an anesthetic. I initialed each page calmly while Leah's eyes scanned and Victor set a reminder on his phone for the first due date like a man settling a bet. We did not take a photo. We did not pop champagne. We were surgeons closing a wound we'd cut on purpose. The first payment came 1 day late with a cashier's check that smelled like panic. The second came on time and bounced because their operating account was a graveyard. The third didn't come at all. Victor changed the locks at 6:02 a.m. on a Thursday, while snow fell like the static on an old TV and Ray made coffee for the city's quiet shift. By noon, we had a line of brokers calling to say they knew people who would kill for that much clear height, this close to I-71. By Friday, I had 2 LOIs from companies with logos that ornament fleets. By Monday, I had a signed lease with a regional distributor that paid on the dot and sent a thank you basket from Gallucci's that contained an entire salami and the truffles no one buys for themselves. Teresa tried spin. She posted a statement about temporary adjustments and regulatory interference. It got 5 likes, mostly from people who didn't understand what had happened, and 2 from accounts that were clearly her own. Evan called me at 2 a.m., drunk enough to pretend he was righteous. I didn't answer. I saved the voicemail. Leah smiled when she read the transcript. "Let him talk," she said. "We're almost done." We weren't done until the sheriff's sale date came and went because we negotiated a deed in lieu with Victor's help. Lakefront handed back title to the building it had never had a right to, and in exchange, I agreed not to pursue deficiency or damages beyond what my soul would collect anyway. The clerk recorded the deed. At 11:32 a.m. on a Wednesday, whose sky looked like paper, I walked out of the Justice Center onto Ontario and called Dad. "We did it," I told his voicemail. "We brought her home." At the probate hearing the next week, the magistrate read the handwriting report into the record like a psalm. The notary cried without tears. The paralegal's name entered the transcript in a way that would make her Google searches sting forever. The magistrate set a schedule to unwind any transfers affected by Dad's incapacity, slow and careful as surgery. It wouldn't fix everything, but it would fix this. When I told Ray that we'd signed a second tenant for the back half of the warehouse, he grinned. "You gonna change the sign?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I am going to repaint the crooked R the way Dad did it." We did it on a Saturday. It smelled like paint and childhood. Samir brought his daughter, who asked if she could put her handprint in the corner, and I said yes because buildings remember who loves them. I held the painter's tape straight, while Ray laughed at me for worrying about an inch no one would ever measure. We ate sandwiches from Jack Frost Donuts because the line at Larder was too long. We left the second coat to dry and stood in the echo of a space that had almost been stolen and now held our breath like a held note. The revenge wasn't the locks or the sheriff or even the deed. It was the rent check that hit our account on the first of every month from people who valued what they paid for. It was the sight of Teresa driving past in her black Tesla, eyes straight ahead, pretending she didn't see the new sign on the corner, Berea Logistics Center, managed by Gordon's Square Capital, with a phone number that rang on my desk. It was the way Evan's name stopped opening doors at Marble Room, the way his laugh lost its audience. It was quiet, and it was thorough. When the Channel 5 consumer reporter called asking for a comment for a piece about family business disputes and how to avoid them, I said nothing except no comment, because I had learned that some wars are best told by tax records and docket sheets. When my aunt asked at Easter if I felt bad, I said, "I feel like I can breathe in my own building," and she nodded like an old woman who knows that breath is a blessing. One afternoon in May, when Cleveland smells like rain and ambition, I wheeled my father across the polished concrete of the warehouse. The receiver was gone, the roof was new, the light fell in clean squares. He looked up at the crooked R and lifted his hand to trace the air. "Home," he said, voice thin but sure. "Home," I agreed. On my desk back in the office sits a brass key. It's not the original. That one went wherever tokens of arrogance go when the story is over. This one opens the door to the survey room where we keep the blueprints and the contracts and the boxes of receipts from when Dad did, everything in pen. Sometimes I pick it up and feel the weight, heavy enough to remember. Then I lock it away because I learned the hard way that keys belong to the building, not to the people who think they are bigger than it. I pass the framed cease and desist letter every morning. I touch the glass with 2 fingers like a blessing and a dare. When I step onto the warehouse floor and hear a forklift beep in reverse, it no longer sounds like a countdown. It sounds like what it always was when I was young and didn't know I'd need it later. A heartbeat you can steer if you refuse to let anyone else hold the map. And when the lights go off at night and the new tenant's trucks settle in the docks like animals sleeping, I lock the door and smile in the dark, remembering the day they replaced me and slid a key across a table, confident I would stay outside forever. The joke, in the end, is quiet and simple and right where they can see it every time they drive past. I didn't just let myself back in. I bought the walls, and the only thing they can do here now is pay me for the privilege. The end.